we need to develop ethics-informed guidelines, policies, protocols to protect clients, first and foremost, of course, and also to protect child welfare professionals, supervisors, administrators, who, in theory, could be sued.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Partnership Perspectives podcast through Rhode Island College and the Department of Children, Youth, and Families in Rhode Island. This podcast is centered around child welfare training and educational topics, all with the goal of helping to support those already working in or with an interest in working in child welfare. My name is Stan Brazier, and I am the project director for the learning partnership between the Rhode Island Department of Children, Youth, and Families, or DCYF, and Rhode Island College. Our desire is to bring information from experts on a variety of topics, all at no cost to hardworking professionals and others. Today, I'm very excited to speak with and to be joined by Holly Pacheco from DCYF, and I'm going to let her introduce herself in a minute. But our guest is going to talk to us today about artificial intelligence, or AI as it's commonly known, and how it's impacting social work and child welfare more specifically. AI is an often very controversial topic. There's risks, there's benefits. Its foray into child welfare is no different. So our guest is going to kind of hopefully help us navigate some of these murky waters. On the other side, you will hopefully come out with a better understanding of both the risks and benefits of how AI is being used and what it means for you in your role as a public child welfare employee. So, Holly, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Holly Pacheco. I am a clinical training specialist as part of workforce development at the State of Rhode Island Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And I am very excited about this topic today, as well as to have Dr. Reamer here. We've worked with him several times in the past, and I'm so excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you. So without further ado, our guest today is Dr. Frederic Reamer. Get ready, brace yourselves. Dr. Reamer has been on the faculty of the School of Social Work at Rhode Island College since 1983. His research and teaching have addressed a wide range of human service issues, including mental health, healthcare, criminal justice, public welfare, and professional ethics. Dr. Reamer received his PhD in social work from the University of Chicago. He has served as a social worker in correctional and mental health settings. He's chaired the national task force that wrote the NASW Code of Ethics and has served on the Code Revision Task Force. He chaired the national task force that created technology-related practice standards for the social work profession and chaired an international task force that developed model technology-related regulatory standards being used by many licensing bodies around the globe. He has conducted extensive research on professional ethics. He's been involved in national research projects. He's published 25 books. I Need a Nap. He's done 190 journal articles. Dr. Reamer, we're so excited to have you. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Stan, and good to be with you and Holly.
Awesome. So we've all heard, and AI is this hot topic now. We've heard terms like ChatGPT, Siri. Most of us maybe have an Alexa in our home. We all have smartphones. Can you tell us maybe from a social work perspective a definition of AI and artificial intelligence and what some of the most recent uses of AI have been in social work and more specifically in like the public child welfare realm?
Sure. Well, first to start, a lot of people are not aware that artificial intelligence has actually been around for nearly 3/4 of a century. The term was actually introduced in the mid-1950s by a Stanford University professor by the name of John McCarthy. Its links to social work and child welfare are much more recent, of course. And in a nutshell, AI combines computer science and data sets to simulate human intelligence and enable all kinds of problem solving in clinical contexts, social work, behavioral health, child welfare, in organizational contexts. So, for example, public child welfare supervisors and administrators can use AI in a variety of ways, which I'll touch on, and also in policy contexts. For example, if child welfare professionals are doing some background research for legislators to introduce bills into the state legislature, AI can be very, very useful. And AI includes what's known as, get ready for all the jargon, there's a lot of jargon, machine learning. What's machine learning? It's using historical data to predict and shape new output. AI can include what we call expert systems, natural language processing, NLP, speech recognition, machine vision. This is the kind of vocabulary we use when we talk about AI. And AI especially depends on algorithms to enhance machine learning and reasoning and what we call self-correction, and lots of creativity. Now, in the human services, social services, child welfare in particular, AI is being used in a variety of ways. Clinical interventions. So there are lots of AI tools that both professionals and users, and notice I didn't use the word clients, right? Users can include clients, but users can also include members of the general public who are seeking information about child welfare related issues, and they're not necessarily clients. So there are all kinds of clinical tools that use AI, like chatbots, which Stan mentioned, and what we call predictive analytic tools, AI-generated avatars, where users and child welfare professionals can communicate, but they don't see each other. They see an avatar of the child welfare professional, of the user. These are tools that clients and members of the public can use to get information about parenting advice, how to handle discipline. What do you do if a child runs away from home? What do you do if your child is experiencing severe anxiety or is being very combative or oppositional, right? Chatbots can provide lots of evidence-based information. Client self-monitoring, that's another use of AI. There are tools out there that enable users to monitor how they're doing. They can monitor their mood. They can monitor their behavior. If they're struggling with substance use issues, they can monitor their risk of slipping. They can do this using AI technology that's embedded in smartphone apps and wearable sensors like our wristwatch. Client surveillance. So some public child welfare agencies actually oversee juvenile corrections. Not all of them do, but some of them do. And in these public child welfare departments, there are clients who are on, let's say, probation. And there are departments around the United States that are using artificial intelligence to actually surveil clients, to keep track of them, their locations, to get information about their behavior, their mental health status. Some of them are using, and this is more jargon, what we call gamification incentives. So if you have a high-risk child who's got some behavior issues on your caseload, and you want to provide some incentives for the kid to go to school, to show up for meetings with a case manager, putting entries in a log if that's an assignment, the AI can give the client so-called incentives or rewards that they can cash in for things they enjoy doing. And we can all imagine what some of those things are. That's AI generated. Also, AI can provide what we call ecological momentary assessment. Say that 3 times fast. Ecological momentary assessment, EMA. What the heck is that? That's AI technology that repeatedly samples clients' behaviors and experiences in real time and provides that data to a child welfare professional, let's say. Social robots. I'm not seeing that in child welfare yet, but I am seeing it in other settings like nursing homes, psychiatric facilities, where a social robot that has AI technology built into it can have conversations with a client, can read text messages to a client, can tell a client jokes, read the client's stories, send an email message on behalf of the client. The social robots are remarkably sophisticated. I was recently lecturing in Japan and saw a social robot in action in a nursing home. Just absolutely remarkable use of AI. Another use of AI, what we call data mining. So what's data mining? That's the extraction of potentially useful information from data to identify patterns and trends using learning algorithms. There's that term again, algorithm. So in public child welfare, staff are very interested in patterns related to child abuse and neglect, outcomes, use of foster care, adoption, perhaps juvenile corrections. And AI is remarkably good at mining data to identify patterns in the data, in addition to conduct risk assessments using that data.
So it could it predict behaviors to a certain extent and also like predict the level of severity of a potential child abuse or neglect case?
In fact, AI is being used for those very purposes, Stan, to try to predict risk, try to predict outcomes, obviously not with 100% precision. And there are a lot of studies going on right now. AI can be used to assess whether a call that comes in Rhode Island, CANS, obviously different name in other jurisdictions, a mandated report regarding suspected abuse or neglect. AI can be used to review all of the information that was included in that report that was called in by a mandated reporter. And AI can then assess level of risk, the extent to which a full-blown investigation needs to occur. There is a very, very prominent use of AI software for this very purpose in public child welfare in Pennsylvania. Allegheny County in the western part of the state. As we all know, in some states, like Rhode Island, public child welfare is governed at the state level, but in many states, it's governed at the county level. Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, has been using AI for a number of years now for these very purposes. Not without controversy, by the way. There is controversy about the ways in which that particular public child welfare agency has been using AI, the accuracy, the validity, whether there's evidence that it's discriminating against individuals who are people of color or who have disabilities. And we can talk more about that later if you'd like. So the short answer to your question is yes.
Well, that was going to be a follow-up to you. Is that particular use of AI in Allegheny County shown to be biased in any way, or is there evidence that using AI actually could help remove some bias because it comes in from a more data-focused, science-based, intelligence, unbiased frame of mind?
Great question. And I believe the answer to your question is it depends who you ask. So if you dive into the literature, and there is now extensive literature on this Allegheny County, I'll use the word experiment. I don't know that they're using that term, but let's say their experimental use, their implementation of AI software. And some people are very critical of it, believing that it is generating some bias with regard to assessments and forecasts and all of that. And others say that the research shows that the instrument is actually quite good at forecasting without bias. And again, it's controversial. And there's a name for it. It's called the Allegheny Family Screening Tool. Allegheny Family Screening Tool. There's now considerable research on this. Allegheny County, to its credit, contracted with independent researchers. To my knowledge, they're very independent researchers. And you can read an awful lot about this. And it depends who you ask with regard to the evidence that it's without bias.
I don't even know. I'm just thinking in terms of AI and it just being more just data, and in regards to child welfare and it being able to assess things, isn't there going to be issues with sensitive data or sensitive information from, parents and families?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is it difficult for AI to tell the difference between data and where's the sensitive information going? Is it being monitored? I'm just very curious as to.
So are you asking, Holly, about whether there are privacy risks and confidentiality risks, the extent to which the data are secure, as opposed to the validity of the data?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to get to that. And not surprisingly, at this moment in time, there are lots of platforms out there, lots of companies that are in the business of creating and implementing marketing AI products. The most reputable among them have built into the model very sophisticated encryption. If they are including PHI, protected health information as defined by HIPAA, for example, they are building in HIPAA compliant software to protect the data. Does that mean there's no possibility of a breach? I don't think it means that at all. Does it reduce the likelihood of a breach? I think it does greatly reduce the likelihood, but I don't think you can get that risk down to zero. So let me finish out the ways in which AI is being used. And then if you'd like, we can talk about some of the potential benefits, some of the potential risks, some of the ethical issues that I am now seeing, focusing on this domain. So in addition to the uses that I mentioned, another use which is particularly relevant to public child welfare, and it overlaps a little bit with what I said earlier, is what we call, again, it's a mouthful, algorithmic forecasting. Algorithmic forecasting. So I alluded to this. What's algorithmic forecasting? It's using risk-related data. So the risk of abuse, the risk of neglect. If a public child welfare agency has responsibility for juvenile corrections, as Rhode Island does, the risk of recidivism for kids who are coming out of a juvenile correctional facility or kids who are on probation. So algorithmic forecasting uses risk-related data from multiple sources, typically, to predict outcomes of the sort that I just mentioned, right? That's algorithmic forecasting.
So in that risk-related data, are there racial, cultural, ethnic factors that are included in that?
Yes, however, and I would say uppercase, however. So one can enter into the algorithm, if you will, demographic data, right? Gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, all those important variables. We know those are very important variables. And then AI, this is where it gets tricky, I think. AI software will draw on the best available data in the research data, evidence-based data, like take all of that information about a particular case, a particular report, and will draw on the best available evidence to then forecast outcomes. And this we can get into a bit later. A number of the studies on which AI depends. So think about it. There are lots of studies on abuse, neglect, risks. You know, when do you need a full-blown investigation? When do you need to pull a kid from a home and place the kid in foster care? All these extraordinarily difficult decisions, right, that human beings have made for decades and decades and decades. If AI is linking information about a particular case with the best available evidence on that kind of case, a lot of the studies on which AI is drawing may not include lower income, kids of color, families of color, kids who identify as LGBTQ plus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that there's a risk that there will be a bit of a mismatch between the database on which AI depends that generates the advice or recommendations and the demographic features of that particular case that the child welfare worker is concerned about. And I was planning to talk about this later, but I'll just throw it in here now. We call that the potential of algorithmic bias. That's the term in the industry, algorithmic bias. It's a fancy term. What does it mean in English? If there is a mismatch between the database, the research evidence on which the AI is building its recommendation, its assessment conclusions, and the features of the particular case that the worker is concerned about, that could, in theory, lead to a problem where it might overstate the need for an investigation, overstate the need for removal of a child from a home. If there's a kind of algorithmic bias, or understated. I mean, it can go in both directions, right? We know that. So that's a major concern in the field right now, the potential for algorithmic bias in general in the human services and in public child welfare in particular. So if you take a look at the in-depth discussions of the Allegheny County use of AI in public child welfare, you will see allegations, assertions that tool generates algorithmic bias. Can I verify that it does? I cannot. I'm not part of those studies. But I will tell you the literature asserts that there's evidence of algorithmic bias. Not everybody agrees that there is. It's a hot topic.
And for those that don't agree, what is their argument?
That several studies on the use of the tool in Allegheny County, according to some, provide evidence that there's minimal evidence. I'll just use that word again. Minimal evidence of algorithmic bias. So, there's some debate about the methodology that these studies have used, the interpretation of the data. It's not unusual in research to get different conclusions about the exact same data set. So some say there's minimal evidence of algorithmic bias. Others say there's significant evidence, and you have that kind of debate going on.
Right.
P.S. There has actually been an investigation into the use of the Allegheny tool. So just last year, the U.S. Justice Department has been looking into what they describe as a controversial AI tool used by the Allegheny County Child Protective Agency following allegations, right? Allegations filed with the U.S. Justice Department that the tool may result in discrimination against families, particularly families with disabilities. And there are a number of civil rights attorneys that are really interested in Allegheny County's use of the so-called Allegheny Family Screening Tool.
Right. So besides screening, I don't want to get this too far off topic here, but are there other uses of AI in child welfare? Say, for example, what level of care to place a child in, what type of foster home or placement, designation to place a child in, or just other, how it can be used to make decisions, because as we know, there's a lot of really difficult decisions that, as you mentioned, that need to be made in child welfare. And it's not just screening for abuse and neglect, it's all these other factors, right? So is there other AI tools that are being used to make some of these decisions?
I cannot give you names of specific tools, specific departments, but there is some discussion in the literature of child welfare professionals using AI to make recommendations for level of care, type of care. Do we need a secure placement? Do we need a group home? Is foster care sufficient? Do we need, like in juvenile probation, intensive supervision or less than intensive supervision? AI is being used for these purposes. Again, not as prominently, in my opinion, as it's being used in Allegheny County to assess risk, but it's absolutely being used for these other purposes. Yeah.
And is there
research? Go ahead.
So is there research being done on those, evaluation being done on those to kind of fall where the risk benefit line is falling?
So I'm aware of several projects where those issues are being explored. Has anything been published? No, we're at the front end of this. I used to say it's like building a boat in the middle of a rushing stream. I think that's too mild. I would say this is more like being asked to build something the size of a cruise ship, not in dry dock, but in the middle of stormy seas. So yes, this stuff's happening, Stan, but no consensus. We're at the early stages. There's very little published on the extent to which these AI tools in public child welfare are valid, are reliable, really assist child welfare professionals. We're at the front end of most of this.
And what do you say to someone that might say, there is no place for this, or I feel that there's no place for this because this should be inherently human-centered thinking, and we need to be looking at empathy and understanding and compassion, and we need to take the the science and the data out of it. And then I feel you have the other people that might say like, well, this could help inform our decisions and maybe make them a little bit less biased. So what do you say to the person that's like, I don't want to see any of it because I just don't think there's a place for this kind of technology in our work?
And you're absolutely right. There are some very thoughtful, principled professionals who say there's no place for this in the human services generally that are very relationship dependent, no place for it in public child welfare, that tools like AI strip away the humanity from what is essentially a relationship-based kind of endeavor. So here's my opinion. At this point, like with so many innovations, there are potential benefits and there are potential risks. And I think we need to go into this with our eyes open, and I think we need to thread the needle. I truly believe that there are some potential benefits of AI based upon what I've seen for the various purposes that I've mentioned: to assess risk, to offer recommendations, to locate resources. By the way, I didn't even mention that there are many professionals who work with children, youth, and families that are using AI to generate their clinical notes, their case management notes. The staff are not writing their notes. AI is doing it. And I can talk about that later if you want. That's another completely different use of AI. Anyway, so my opinion is, at this point, there are potential benefits of artificial intelligence in child welfare, both private and public sectors. And there are very significant risks. There is a very steep, potentially slippery slope here. And that at this point in the evolution of AI and its application to child welfare, we need to identify what those potential downsides are. That's the responsible thing to do. And we need to develop, in my opinion, we need to develop ethics-informed guidelines, policies, protocols to protect clients, first and foremost, of course, and also to protect child welfare professionals, supervisors, administrators, who, in theory, could be sued if, for example, AI understates the risk of a 16-year-old suicide risk. That 16-year-old public child welfare client dies by suicide, and the professionals are sued. And I serve as an expert witness in lots and lots of cases around the country, both litigation and licensing board cases. And a significant percentage of the cases that I serve in as an expert witness involve suicide among kids, high-risk kids. And the lawsuit alleges failure to assess suicide risk properly, failure to manage the suicide risk properly, failure to prevent the suicide attempt, and failure to prevent the death by suicide. And when I started doing that kind of expert witness consultation, artificial intelligence didn't exist, but it does now. And some professionals are depending on AI to assess suicide risk. So to your question, two things. One is, I think we need to take the deep dive and identify the potential risks, the ethical risks, the liability risks, and I have a whole roster of those risks, which I can share. And then we need to develop ethics-informed guardrails, policies, protocols. I do not think AI should supplant the professional-client relationship, the human relationship. It should not supplant that. I don't think AI should supplant or replace the judgment that child welfare professionals have to exercise about level of risk, type of care, whether to remove a kid from a home. What I do think is feasible is for AI in some contexts, for reputable AI. There's a lot of junk out there, but there's some really good stuff. I think it can supplement, not supplant, but supplement child welfare professionals' judgment and assessments. It's a tool. We draw on all kinds of information to make difficult decisions. And I would say this is another potentially useful variable in the equation as we make difficult decisions, but we shouldn't be relegating our decisions to AI. That, I think, is very high risk.
Yeah, it sounds just like avoiding an over reliance on it, right? That seems to be
Absolutely.
what it kind of boils down to, right?
Well, I would say two things. One is avoiding an over reliance on it, because it's a shiny new toy here. It's very seductive. And a lot of professionals, I find, because I talk to a lot of people about these issues, a lot of professionals are drawn to this because it's very powerful. And I think too often now, professionals are using it without assessing the quality of the AI tool, without assessing the validity of the information, without assessing whether there's algorithmic bias, without assessing what we need to do, as Holly mentioned, what we need to do to protect the privacy and confidentiality of the data. I think people are moving a bit too quickly, including, as I mentioned a little while ago, using AI to generate their clinical notes, their case management notes. I think we just need to be really cautious, really thoughtful, really principled as we take the deep dive into this arena.
Gotcha. So the other thing that I'm interested in is flipping it a little bit to think about how a client would use AI and how can a professional become more aware of this usage, identify this usage, and things that they might be doing. Like I said, voice generation, text generation, like you mentioned, avatars, things like that. What are some key things to consider for that relationship that the professional has with the client, and some of the things that they might want to be on the lookout for?
Yeah. So if we were together in person, I could pull up on a screen various AI tools out there that clients and members of the general public can use to get information, help them with self-care, self-soothing. I'm in the middle of a crisis with my kid and it's 2:30 in the morning. Help, help, help. There are a number of tools out there where any one of us can log in and ask the chatbot, which is built specific. I'm not talking about ChatGPT. I'm not talking about Copilot. Those are the general use AI tools. I'm not talking about Perplexity, which is a very powerful AI tool. I'm talking about tools that are specifically developed for behavioral health, for parents, right? They have a much narrower focus. And I think any agency, public or private, any professional who uses these tools needs to take a very close look at how they were developed, the quality of the sponsors, the due diligence, the extent to which they've engaged in due diligence to try to prevent algorithmic bias, the issues I mentioned, the steps they've taken to protect the privacy and confidentiality of the data. This is key. And frankly, I think anybody who uses this on the professional side needs to consult with a skilled attorney who specializes in risk management, in child welfare, in the human services, to craft language for the AI tool. So if I'm going to offer a tool to clients, to members of the public, I've got to have a very carefully worded consent to use AI statement that everybody's obligated to read before they use it. And it goes through in user-friendly language exactly what the potential benefits are, exactly what the potential risks are. We need to be transparent about that. I need to have disclaimers. So, you got to get the lawyers involved for some of this stuff. Any child welfare professional who uses this, I think they've got to slow it down, be very prudent, and dot the I's and cross the T's to address all those issues. And they also need to know, depending upon what state they're in, that data they obtain, professionals, data they obtain from clients embedded in an AI tool could end up being subpoenaed. Right? We call that ESI, electronically stored information. And there are rules of civil procedure that lawyers follow, both federal and state. The federal rule is Rule 34. It explicitly addresses subpoenas of electronically stored information. Every state that I know of has a comparable rule. And if information shared by a user with a child welfare professional is of a sensitive nature relevant to a criminal investigation regarding abuse or neglect, let's say, or a malpractice suit, or in some states, a 16-year-old who says, I'm pregnant. This is in a chatbot. I'm pregnant. I was assaulted by my stepbrother. My parents don't know. I need help because I want to terminate this pregnancy. Help me, help me, help me. In some states, if a professional provides assistance with regard to that decision, that could be considered aiding and abetting under the criminal law. And I'm not making this up. I've had conversations with attorneys in a couple of states about this very issue. And now we have to think about that if we're using AI tools. That stuff can be subpoenaed and used against both client or user and conceivably the professional.
So speaking of stuff that could be subpoenaed, you mentioned notes and using AI to generate notes. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And is that a good idea? Is that not a good idea? Where do you fall on that?
Yeah, well, you can probably predict what I'm going to say here, and that is potentially useful with major risks. It's both ends. So I have actually monitored very closely several of these tools. I could rattle off the names of the commercial products. I'm not going to do that, but I could because I don't want to necessarily endorse them. But I am aware of 3 major tools where if Stan Brager or Holly Pacheco is meeting with a client, and let's say Holly and Stan are not thrilled about documentation because it's time consuming, it's onerous, it's a pain for many of us. I know that. And so here's this tool where Holly and Stan can ask the client for his, her, or their permission to record the session, right? You want to get client consent, of course. And here's how it works. And I've seen this in action. The session gets recorded. The session recording then gets uploaded to a HIPAA compliant platform. The AI embedded in the platform will listen, air quotes, because it's not a human being. The AI will listen to that recording and generate the clinical note. And I've read a lot of those notes, and a lot of them are really, really good. 2 potential problems in my experience. I find that some professionals are drawn to this AI tool because they don't like to document. Again, I fully understand that. So it's very seductive. And I'm worried that the professionals who are especially appreciative of this option because it saves so much time may be less likely to proofread the note generated by AI. So I have read some of those notes. And while they're quite good, they sometimes contain errors, no great surprise. And it is the responsibility of the professional to proofread very carefully, edit very carefully. And I'm not sure that's always happening. In fact, I know it's not always happening. So that's a huge liability risk to use AI to generate the notes and not proofread and edit carefully. And here's another potential problem. I've been in sessions with clients where in the middle of a session, the client is discussing a very traumatic event and begins to cry. And I see the tears coming down the cheek. And if I'm a clinician, that's clinically relevant information. I would be putting that in my notes, right? If a client gets up and is agitated and starts pacing the room, I'm going to put that in my notes because that's clinically relevant behavior. And, ideally, I would follow up with the client about, I notice you're pacing around. Tell me what's going on for you. Tell me about the whatever. How does AI software capture the tears? They make no sound. If a client is pacing around the room, agitated, how does AI capture that? So I am worried that there's some clinically relevant information that AI may not capture.
Yeah, and it just misses that human element too, like you said, the relational element.
So may I, with your permission, share with you just about 2 minutes of a discussion about AI and the use of AI and its potential application in social work. Okay. Yeah. So we're going to play about 2 minutes of this.
Ever find yourself scrolling through like endless TikToks?
Yeah.
Like curated just for you.
Yeah.
Or maybe you've been like kind of amazed by those chatbots that seem, I don't know, almost human.
Yeah.
That's AI in action, quietly shaping our kind of digital lives every single day.
Absolutely.
But what happens when this technology enters a field dedicated to human connection and complex social challenges? Buckle up, because today we're taking a deep dive into the world of AI in social work.
It's a fascinating and rapidly developing landscape.
Yeah.
What's intriguing is how AI, a technology we often perceive as, cold and data-driven, is being integrated into a profession deeply rooted in human empathy and understanding.
Exactly. We're talking about AI being used in crisis text lines, apps designed to support veterans with PTSD, and even algorithms predicting which individuals might need the most assistance from social workers. There's no doubt the potential to help is huge.
Huge, yeah.
But is it really that simple?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Professor Frederic Reamer, whose work we'll be unpacking today, doesn't shy away from the complexities.
Right.
He reminds us that AI, by its very definition, involves systems designed to analyze information and react to it. They're trained on massive amounts of data to achieve specific goals.
Okay, I'm seeing where you're going with this.
Yeah.
If AI systems are only as good as the data they're trained on, what happens when that data reflects existing societal biases?
That's where the ethical tightrope really comes into play.
Okay.
Imagine an algorithm meant to identify individuals at risk of homelessness, but the data it's learned from disproportionately represents a particular demographic.
So the AI might end up reinforcing those very inequalities it's supposed to address. Instead of leveling the playing field, it could unintentionally perpetuate existing disparities. And we're not just talking about homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
This applies to mental health support, access to resources, and even potentially influencing the trajectory of someone's life. It's a lot to unpack. Social work is built on such deeply human elements. Trust, understanding, the ability to meet individuals where they're at. Can AI really replicate that?
That's the core question. And Professor Reamer goes straight for the ethical considerations. One of the biggest challenges he highlights is informed consent.
So, Stan, did you hear those two people raising some of the very issues you asked me about in terms of the potential implications of AI for the relationship, the human judgment?
I did.
And would you be surprised to know that those two people you just heard having what I thought was a really good conversation about my work, those are not human beings.
If you weren't sharing your screen that says it's generated by AI, I wish I would have never known. Probably.
I created that dialogue. It took me about, I would say, 90 seconds to create that dialogue. And those two people, air quotes, are not real people.
Mm.
It's an AI platform that generated that conversation. And all I had to do was upload some of my research to that platform. The platform converted that research into that conversation, and those are not human beings. What do you think, Holly?
So fascinating. I didn't pick up the generated by AI as Stan did. I was listening and not watching. And it just sounded like two people having a conversation and
You got it.
going back and forth.
So
I was waiting for you to join the conversation. I was like, where is this a podcast that we are, what's going on here?
So would you agree? That is really impressive that those two people, air quotes, are having this, I think, nuanced conversation. They're chatting, a little bit of humor thrown in there. I think it's really impressive and really scary. It's both.
I agree.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really great example of how, like you just said, how impressive and how scary it is and how incredibly useful it could be. But it's this weird sort of inflection point, I feel like, that we're at right now, where you said, like you said, it's very seductive and it's very kind of so easy. All I have to do is this and boom, look at that. It sounds so great. It sounds so real. It sounds so genuine. But then there's all these other, potential dangers and pitfalls.
Yeah. So the good news is, and I know we need to wrap this up soon, but the good news is that I think we have a growing awareness of the potential benefits and the potential risks. We have a growing awareness of the not potential, the actual ethical issues and what we need to do to address them to try to prevent harm, both to clients and to professionals. And there are some really good groups out there that are doing this kind of work. So I'll tell you very briefly, about 2 weeks ago, I was invited to give a lecture to an audience at the University of Southern California. They have a center on artificial intelligence, and they are focusing especially on social work and mental health. They're paying a lot of attention to these issues, which is, why they invited me to join them. So that's a good sign, right? There is a group in Utah, actually a state agency in Utah, where the executive director reached out to me about a month ago to talk about what kinds of ethics-informed guidelines they in Utah should be creating that would be applicable to any public and private agency in Utah that's using artificial intelligence. At the international level, UNESCO has a huge project focusing on the identification of and responses to ethical issues associated with the use of AI. And I'm now spending a good bit of my time focused on these issues as they pertain to social work, behavioral health, and so forth.
Fascinating. Dr. Reamer, thank you so much. Anything else you want to add? But to the, specifically to Rhode Island DCYF, because that's our kind of target audience. Any parting words or parting advice you want to leave them with?
Well, number one, I'm impressed that you folks put this on the agenda because I do think it's cutting edge. And even though Rhode Island DCYF, to my knowledge, is not actively using AI in the ways in which some other places are, I think it's critically important to know what's out there, the ways in which some other child welfare agencies are putting their toes, sometimes their feet, or more than their feet into the water with regard to this. And I would say, as Rhode Island DCYF officials are contemplating, whether to use AI, and if so, how to use AI, they need to continue to monitor these developments around the country, frankly, around the world, so that any use of AI is informed by best practices that are ethics-based. We have to pay attention. As one of the individuals in that podcast, the AI-generated podcast said, quote, "Buckle up, because, we don't know where this is all going to head." But this bell has been rung. And I do not know how to unring a bell.
Right. The plane is taking off, and we're trying to build a plane as it's flying. To use another pun.
Yeah. Lots of metaphors for this.
Lots of metaphors. Dr. Reamer, thank you so much again. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Great to be here with you.
Thank you.